right, we're back. Graveyard Shift Movie Podcast, episode number 118. And this week, it was supposed to be Bride of Chucky once again. And it was gonna be Bride of Chucky, but then a little fucker named Hurricane Ian came along, and as of right now, he's about 7 hours away from smacking into me. And basically, we didn't have time to film Bride of Chucky before the hurricane hit, and the power and everything is most likely going to go out. So we just decided I was just going to do an emergency episode, if you will, to get this one ready before the shit hits the fan. So who knows? You may never get Bride of Chucky. I might be dead by the time that this podcast comes out. But if not, then Bride of Chucky will be next week. But this week, I watched a movie called Trilogy of Terror from 1975. It's an anthology movie. It's 3 stories in the movie. The thing connecting them is that the same actress is in all 3 of them, Karen Black, and she'll play the lead throughout it. And every fucking story is written by a James Matheson or some shit. I don't remember his fucking name, but it was like the same 3 people involved for every story, and I was like, this is just the same guy over and over again. Like, I don't know. I just thought it would be different people writing different stories, but it was always the same dude. I'm gonna give this movie a 5, I think. The first story. Well, first off, the only story in this that's a horror story is the final story. Story 3, Amelia. That's the only one that's a horror. The first one, we'll get into it, but it's not a horror. And then the second one definitely isn't a horror. The first one kind of keeps your interest going, and then it throws in a twist just out of nowhere. It does that a couple times, but it throws in a twist just out of nowhere that kind of made it worth watching. It was like, oh, okay, you know. The second one is a piece of shit. We'll get to that. That one is just a boring piece of shit. And then the third one is a boring piece of shit up until the last 5 minutes. That's probably the best 5 minutes of the movie. It's great. So I don't know how all that evens out to a 5. But that's what I'm going to give it. I'm going to give it a 5. So, yeah, you know, I'm always a sucker for anthology movies. I always like a good, just mixed. Creepshow, one of my favorites. Trick or Treat. God, what was the... John Carpenter did one called, Night Shift? Not Night Shift. Something, but he was like not an Undertaker. He was like a guy working with dead bodies or something. He would tell different stories or whatever, but that one's out there too. There's a lot of them, so they're cool to watch. But we watched a couple. What was the fucking Dark Tapes? The Dark Tapes. Didn't we watch that? That was an anthology. VHS. I watched. You know. So yeah, we like a good anthology movie around here. And this is a pretty fucking early one. I don't know the first movie to do it, but 75 is pretty early on. So credit to them for that. But hey, spoiler warning for Trilogy of Terror. If you've never seen it, I'm going to ruin everything about it. So, you have been warned. The first story to kick us off is a story called Julia. And it starts off with 2 40-year-old men who are college students sitting on a bench. And Julia walks by, and we'll learn later that Julia is their teacher. Like history teacher or something. It doesn't really fucking matter, but she's their teacher. And as she walks by, the other main character for the story, Chad, looks at her and he's like, you know, I have this sudden urge to figure out what she looks like underneath all those clothes, you know? And his friend's like, what, really? And he's like, yeah, it's never happened until just now, but now that's all I want to know, you know? So they go to class and shit, and as she's teaching, he's getting flashes in his head of him coming up to her. She's asleep on the bed, and he's feeling her up and shit, and he's like, oh yeah, you know. And she like sits on the desk and moves her skirt so like her legs out and shit. And he's like, oh yeah, and he's jerking off in the back seat. Um, so after class is done, he meets her in the hallway and he's trying to like flirt with her a little bit. And he's like, hey, photography, I love pictures and I love going to see the pictures, talking about the movies. And he's like, how about me and you go see this fucking, and before he can get it out, she's like, I got a class to go to, Chad. And she like walks off or whatever. Um, so Julie goes home and her friend is there. And Julie is this very shy character. Uh, and like she wears her hair up in a bun. And, they keep saying that she dresses like modestly or whatever, but like keep in mind she just sat on the desk like open legged, like but anyway, the friend wants her, she's like, listen, you really need to get out more, and you need to see someone. And I got a friend who has this guy who I think you'd be a really good match with. And the friend's like, no, I don't really want to. And then her friend is like, if you put in some effort, you could really be attractive. And I was like, guys, she looks pretty good right now. Like, she's not like some ugly woman or whatever, It's just, so, but it's still, the Julie's like, no, I'm all right. Um, so as the friend leaves the house, she walks out and we see that Chad is outside the house, like peeking around the windows and shit. And this is a part that's weird to me because Julie's walking around in like this nightgown or whatever, and she like is brushing her hair, and then she takes off the nightgown, and Chad outside, his eyes are like, looking, but they never show you that he can actually see. They never show you where he's standing to see this because she's like in the middle of the living room, and where the only window we can see in the shot isn't where he would be standing. So he's standing somewhere, and I guess he can see her fucking get naked. But the movie doesn't do a very good job of conveying where he actually is. So the next day, or maybe a couple days later, he's talking to her again, and he's like, hey, we should go watch this fucking vampire movie. It's like this old French movie that's in English subtitles, and they remaster it. It's at the drive-in. And she's like, we're not supposed to date students and all this shit. And he's like, well, I'm not going to tell anybody. And so she's like, all right, I guess, I'll come with you. So they go to the drive-in, and the fucking movie on the drive-in, it's like literally they just took the movie. It's like if you were on Sony Vegas and you pulled in another video clip and you just shrunk down that video clip and put it in the video clip you were working on right now. That's what they did. They just superimposed another movie on the screen. It doesn't look like it's a projection at all. It's just another movie they stuck in the movie. Like it's a, and apparently the movie I think is called fucking, I don't know. I was gonna say Night Shift again, but I already busted that one out. But it's supposedly another like movie that the director of this one had directed, and so that's just one of his movies on the screen. It almost looked like Karen Black in that movie too, and I didn't look it up to see if it is, but I was like, oh, I thought it would be cool if they went from them in the drive-in to the movie and the other story or whatever is like the movie they're watching, but they didn't do that, so whatever. um so Chad, as they're sitting there, is like, hey, do you want a drink? And she's like, yeah, I could go with a drink. And so he goes to get her a drink, and it's like I forgot this was supposed to be a horror movie, because he goes and gets her a drink, and then he fucking drugs it as he like pours the shit in. And I was like, oh, I was like, fucking come on, Chad. Because I was here like, listen, you guys are on this date already. Like, there's a good chance if you just play your cards right, like, you could just, have sex with this bitch anyway. But I guess that's not what the thrill is for him. His thrill is, and it leads into a plan he has later. So I guess it was all part of a bigger scheme than I could imagine. But yeah, he drugs it. And then he comes back, and he like gives her the drink, and she's drinking it, and she's like, "Oh, this is kind of bitter." And he's like, "Oh yeah, they must not be putting enough syrup in it or whatever." And then she literally, I don't think this is how these drugs work. She's literally like watching, and then she's like, "Ah," and she just falls out, and she's like asleep. So he drives them to a motel. He gets a room, and when we're in the room, she's like passed out on the bed, and it's like the scene from his dream sequence thing he had in the classroom, where she's like asleep on the bed, and he takes a photo of her, and I was like, oh shit, I thought this whole stuff about like photography is my passion was just like a fucking a pickup line somehow, but apparently he's into it, because then later we'll see him in a dark room in a little bit. But yeah, he takes a picture of her, and then he's like unbuttoning his shirt, and as he like climbs on top of her, it fades to black before we see anything. I also saw that this was apparently a TV movie, a made-for-TV movie, so that would explain why there's no like graphic nudity or just cursing or anything like that, because it was on fucking ABC or some shit. Um, so so it fades to black, and then we cut to him pulling up in front of her house, and she fucking wakes up as they pull up in front of their house, and she's like, "Oh, I fell asleep," and he was like, "Oh yeah, you must have been really tired. I just decided to let you sleep because all the work you do, you deserve to rest. One of those things." And she's like, "Oh, I'm really sorry." So he walks her up to the door, and he's like, "Oh, so can I call you tomorrow?" And she's like, "No, this was a mistake. We shouldn't have done this in the first place. I could get fired. You could get expelled. Like, we can't keep seeing each other." And so he's like, "We'll see." And then he's like, "Good night, Mrs. fucking." Can't fucking think of a name. uh, yeah, good night, And so he leaves. And then that night we see him in his dark room that he has. This is the second movie in a row with a dark room, right? Then I just watched Shudder last week, and there's a whole shit about the dark room. But anyway, he's in this dark room, and he's developing photos. And so the next day he calls her, and he's like, "Me and you are taking a drive right fucking now." And so he comes over and picks her up like 8 o'clock sharp, like super early. He drives him fucking somewhere. It doesn't really matter. There was no real need for them to even go on this drive. He could have just came to her house, but whatever. And she's like, "All right, so why did you bring me out here?" And he opens up the glove box, and he takes out the envelope, and he pulls out the fucking pictures. And she's like, "What is this?" And he's like, "I told you photography was my passion." Yeah, so he's got these photos. And basically he's using his blackmail to just keep probably fucking this lady, or keeping her like as a slave of some sort, like making her do what he wants and shit. The next day in class, like, he walks up and gives her a note as she's teaching, and it says like, "After class, come to my apartment. I got some friends I want you to meet." And she gets like all flustered, and she dismisses class early and shit. Uh, but then there never is a scene of her going to the apartment. Like, you never see that. So I don't know if he like had friends come over and like take turns with her, or if I don't know what happened. You don't see any of it. They just don't talk about it. What you do see is Julie getting home late at night, and this is when I learned that the friend from earlier apparently fucking lives with her, because she just like has a bed in the living room or some shit. Like, it was a very weird location to be sleeping. And she's like, "Julie, you've been coming home late like this for a month. What's going on? But Julie's like, I can't tell you." And so she just like goes scurrying into the other room, and the friend is like, "Oh. So then all that happened, right? This has been going on for like 20 minutes. Then we go over to the next scene. The very next scene after that is Julie and the dude in his apartment, I guess. And she gives him a drink. And then she's like, I'm tired of playing these games, Chad. She's like, I'm bored. I'm not scared or thrilled. I'm bored. And he's like, what the fuck are you talking about? Since when does it matter what you want? And she's like, from the beginning. And as she's saying this, it suddenly dawned on me that the movie started with her walking by and the guy being like, oh, I've never thought about it before. It just popped into my head right now, but I really want to see her naked or whatever, you know? And I was like, holy shit, is she using like mind powers? And yeah, I guess she is. She tells him that, you know, since all this started with her walking by and you suddenly wanted to see me naked and all this shit. And she never comes out. They never say what power she uses, but somehow she's got like these mind fucking powers, and she was able to uh manipulate him into doing all this stuff. I don't know where this came from or why she wanted to be like this shy teacher who's like whipped around. Maybe that's her kink or something. I don't know what, but either way, she was fucking with him. And then the guy, as she's saying this, Chad starts to like, his tongue starts to peek out. He's like, you know, and he's like, you fucking, or he's freaking out. And she's like, first you'll be confused, then you'll have full body paralysis, and then eventually you'll go into cardiac arrest. And so he's like, you poisoned me. And she goes, no, I've killed you. And literally, it basically does the dun 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 sound effect. And Chad goes, no! It like jumps at her. And it was great. And he fucking falls down to the floor.
You've drugged me!
No, dear. I've killed you.
And yeah, he dies. And then she like pulls him into the dark room and lights like all his chemicals on fire. And so the next day she's having to like sit in bed with a newspaper that says like student dead in chemical fire or whatever. And with her friend there, and she has to be like, he was one of my brightest students, you know? And so the friend is like, all right, well, you know, cheer up or whatever. And she leaves. And when she leaves, Julie pulls out this scrapbook where we see a whole bunch of other newspaper clippings of like, boy found dead at lake and all this shit. So apparently she's been doing this for a very long time. And she adds Chad's newspaper clipping to the book. And then she gets a knock on the door. And when she opens it up, it's a new student who says that, you know, he saw like her name on this bulletin board that said she was like tutoring or whatever. And she's like, yeah, come on in. And then the story ends with her saying, you know, we're going to be friends. We're going to be very good friends, as she closes the door. And that's the end of Julia. So like I said, the twist fucking came out of nowhere. And there definitely wasn't any like hints that that was what was happening, besides the beginning of him being like, oh, I've never thought about it, but I want, you know. But yeah, it made the whole fucking the story, because I was like, this is pretty fucking shitty. And then the random twist that came out of nowhere was like, oh, that's something. So yeah, so Julie, pretty meh, but had a really good fucking ending out of nowhere. Story 2 is Millicent and Therese, either one of those. Even though they never call her Millicent, Jesus fucking Christ, and that's probably why they never call her that. They just call her Millie the whole time. But it starts off with Karen Black, again, obviously playing Millie, and she's watching old footage of her as a girl with like her father or whatever. And she starts writing in this little book, and she's like, the funeral is over now, all this shit. And she starts to write about how her sister Therese is fucking evil, and no one sees it but her, and she, you know, likes pain, and she manipulates people and all this shit. And so Millie invites her sister's boyfriend over to the house. And she's trying to explain to him that her sister is fucking evil. And she shows him like a photo of her sister when she was 15, like pressed up against her dad and shit. And he's like, what does this have to do with anything, you know? And so then she's like, when my sister was 16, she seduced my dad. And then not long after that, my mom died. And the police said it was an accident or whatever, but she knew that it was like her sister had poisoned her fucking milk at night or some shit. And so, yeah, so she's like, oh, my sister. They never explain what happens to the dad. So the dad's just dead somehow too as well, but I'm not really sure how that happened. They also have Karen Black wearing these fucking glasses in this story that give her the worst case of like crooked eyes I've ever fucking seen in my life. And like in the next story, she's not wearing glasses. I was looking at her eyes and I couldn't tell if they were just crooked naturally. And it didn't look like it, so I'm convinced it was just these giant fucking glasses they have her wearing for this. And like the light is bouncing off of them the whole time. And yeah, they were really bad. So she then shows him these books. She has this giant fucking library. She shows him these books, and she's like, look at this. Satanism, pornography, voodoo. This is what my sister uses to trap the souls of others and shit. And I was like, what? She's using porn books to fucking trap trap something else. Am I right, guys? High five. So she's like, listen, I'm trying to help you. But the boyfriend is like, it seems like you're the one that needs the help. And she's like, you're being lied to. She's deceiving you. She does it to everybody. And the dude's like, I'm out of here. So he starts to leave. And then Millie says that she told me what happened that night at Molly's or something like that. I couldn't hear what the last word she said. But it's something like that. She told me what happened at Molly's. And that makes the dude stop. And he like turns around. And Millie is like, yeah, I always knew that she loved inflicting pain. But apparently she loves getting other people to join in on doing that. And the dude starts to like cry. And she's like, now do you believe me? And he's like, uh-huh. And then that's it. He's gone from the rest of the movie. So I don't know what the fuck happened at Molly's, but I'm guessing that like she somehow manipulated him into like killing somebody or fucking somebody up or something, but they never fucking go more on that. Or maybe I just missed it. Maybe I'm dumb, but it seemed like they just never talked about it again. I was like, well, what the fuck happened to Molly's? Like that would have been a much more interesting story than what's happening right now, but... So, Millie is back to writing in her book, and she's talking about how her sister found out that she told her boyfriend all this stuff about her, and she was pissed at her, and like snapped at her and was yelling at her and shit. And I was like, man, it would have been a lot cooler if we would have actually got to see that in the fucking movie. And then very soon, guys, I'll realize why we didn't see that in the movie. So after that, she calls this doctor that she's seen, and she tells him that Theresa's upset at them and thinks that they're doing some like perverted act and all this shit. And she's like, I really need to see you, because she thinks that her sister is going to do something bad and she's getting worse and shit. And so the guy's like, all right, I'll swing by tomorrow. So he does. And when the door opens up, we see Karen Black again, this time wearing a blonde wig, like a white tank top and like this short orange mini skirt. And now this is Teresa. Or Therese, or however the fuck her name is. And this would explain why we never see them together, because they're played by the same fucking lady. And so she invites her in, And this whole scene is just bullshit, with the sister just talking bad about Millie. And then eventually she tries to like seduce the doctor, and he's like, I'm leaving. And so as he's leaving, she's like, are you a virgin or are you just gay? You know? She doesn't say, but she's like, you don't like women or whatever. And he's like, I'm out of here. So he fucking leaves. And then as he leaves, she runs up the stairs and she starts banging on a door. And she's like, you hear that? He's never coming back. How does that make you feel? And apparently Millie and Therese live together in this fucking house because Millie has said that she's tried to stay close to her sister to stop anything bad from happening or whatever. But she's knocking on the door and she's like, yeah, you like that? And then it cuts into the room where Millie's sitting there, and she's like, I'm not going to open my book. I'm not going to open the door. I'm just going to keep writing in my little book and shit. And she's like, I'll never, let her in or some shit. And then, after that, there's a random fucking scene of Millie going outside and seeing this little girl crying. And she's like, hey, what's going on? And she's like, your sister broke my dolly. I was playing with it and she said I was too loud. And so she threw it on the ground and broke it. And Millie's like, oh, I'm sorry. When I'm in town the next time, I'll buy you a doll. And she's like, really? And the girl's like, yeah. And she's like, thanks, Miss Millie. And that's it. That's that scene. I don't know why they were like, we need to pad the runtime because this one's getting a little short. So then after that, fucking Millie is like, all right, voodoo doll. She fucking collects like toenail clippings and hair and all this shit. And yeah, she calls like her doctor and she's like, I'm not gonna need your help anymore. I figured out how to fix this problem. And she hangs up, and as she hangs up, we see her pull out the voodoo doll that looks like Millie. So the doctor keeps trying to call back, but no one's answering, so he's like, fuck. So he gets dressed, and he goes over to their house, and he just breaks in, because no one answers the door. He just goes in through, like, a side door. And he's calling out to people, and he's looking through the rooms, but it's empty everywhere. Until eventually he goes into Millie's room, and finds not Millie's room, Therese's room, and finds Therese laying on the ground, with the voodoo doll next to her, with a fucking needle shoved into its chest, and the dude is like, So he calls for an ambulance to come, to pick up this dead body, and when the ambulance pulls up, the front hood or bumper of the ambulance is fucking backwards. And I was like, okay, well, maybe this is like remastered footage or something, and the footage is flipped. But then I was like, no, because that wouldn't make any sense either, because where the driver and the passenger got it was like the right side. Like the car is how it should look. They just put the sticker on backwards. And I was like, guys, what the fuck? No one's checking the ambulance sign? Was that the only ambulance sticker you had? And you fucked it up on the one? And you were like, let's just hope no one notices. But anyway, the ambulance sticker's fucking backwards. Also, it's not an ambulance, it's a fucking van that they put a siren on it and threw ambulance on the front, and they were like, there you go, ambulance. So they come in, and they're looking at the dead body, and then the doctor's like, yeah. And then he pulls off the blonde wig, and he's like, this is the most severe case of duo personality I've ever seen. And that's the fucking end of the story. So the whole time, there was only one person. It was duo personality disorder. And so Millie and Therese were the same person. And she killed herself, but also the evil sister lady. And yeah, that story sucked. It was fucking bad. So there you go. So story 3, the third and final story, is called Amelia. And this story, this lady, Karen Black, once again, Amelia. The story names don't fucking matter because they don't really use... The story names are literally just the names of the people involved. It's not like a story name. You know how like Creepshow, it was like, Father's Day, or like the crate or something like that. Like, there's no names involved. It's just the names of the people in the story. So, yeah, so Amelia is at home, and she has this box, and opens up this box, and there's this fucking doll in there, that we'll learn later is like a Zuni fucking hunter doll. And so it's like, it's got hair, it's got these sharp ass teeth, and it's got this spear and these evil looking eyes and shit. It's a cool looking doll, but she's like, look at you, you're ugly. Even your fucking mother wouldn't love you. And I was like, Jesus Christ, lady, like, why are you being so mean to this fucking doll? So, yeah, so she has this doll, and then speaking of dolls, she then calls her mom right after this, and we get a 5-minute fucking scene of this lady talking to her mom, but we can only hear one side of the conversation. So it's just 5 minutes of this lady talking to herself. And basically, the mom is pissed off because the daughter's telling her that she's dating this guy who's a history professor. That's the reason she has, like, this doll, because she bought it for him for his birthday. She thought he would like it. And she's going to spend the night with him. And I was like, is she calling her mom to be like, hey, I'm going to fuck this guy, you know? But apparently she's calling her because the mom is jealous that the lady is staying the night with the boyfriend and not, spending time with her. And the lady's like, I come over to your house 2 or 3 nights a week, you know, but the mom's one of these real possessive, moms and jealous and all this shit. So, yeah, literally, it's about 5 minutes of this, and then she starts talking about the Zuni Hunter doll, and supposedly a Zuni Hunter spirit lives inside of the doll, and there's this gold chain around its neck, and if the chain is broken, the doll and the spirit will become one, and it'll be a living thing. And so, the mom fucking just hangs up on her, and she has, like, the doll in her hand, and she's like, oh. No. Oh, guys, a hurricane warning is in effect for this area. Boy, I there's a hurricane? What? So anyway, yeah, the mom hangs up, and so the lady's angry, and so she, like, slams the doll down on the ground, and the chain breaks, and so it's like, oh, okay, well, there you go. So the lady goes and she takes this bath, and then she comes out of the bathroom and calls the boyfriend. Fuck! The work phone hit me, and then the personal phone got me. So she calls the boyfriend, and she's like, hey, can we spend, tomorrow together or something? I gotta go talk to my mom or whatever. But the weird thing is she never once intended to go over to the mom. I don't know what was going on. Either way, she's like, hey, we can't hang out today. And so, once again, that's another phone call that we can't hear the conversation of either one. So eventually she hangs up, and she goes, like, into the kitchen, and she's, like, making food, and she puts, like, fucking, it looked like ribs. She, like, puts this food in the oven to cook. And when she comes back in the living room, she sees the doll is gone. Gone. So she's like, what, did you fall off the table, So she's, like, looking under the table, and then she's, like, feeling under the couch, and something, like, pricks her finger, and she's like, what was that, So she's reaching under again, and eventually she manages to get the spear away from the fucking doll. And then she's like, oh, I got one part of you, And then you hear, like just running feet away, And so she goes to follow. She goes in the kitchen, and she has, like, this knife set, and you see, like, this tiny little knife is missing from the set of knives. It goes on for a while of her just following sounds, and she'll see, like, a shadow and shit, and she'll follow it. Until eventually, these 2 lamps that she has, the lights go out, and she's like, oh, what, the bulb must have burned out, and she goes to turn it on, and then out of nowhere, the doll fucking pops up and just starts stabbing her in the feet. And he's going like, just making these fucking noises. And there is actual like puppetry going on. I was surprised. I was wondering how they were gonna do the doll. And like his mouth is opening, and it doesn't look bad. There's a lot of quick shots of him just running around. So, but I prefer that. Like they found a way to make it look all right. When obviously I think they didn't have a very big budget, and this is 75, so like puppeteers probably weren't like these. You know, it's not a Chucky puppeteer. Let's put it that way. You know, but they made it look good. It looked fine. So yeah, it's fucking attacking her and stabbing the shit out of her legs. Eventually she like falls down and it jumps on her, and she just like chucks it across the room, and he's like as he's like flying or whatever. She shuts herself in this other fucking room, and she's like, oh, you know, and then it like stops for a second, and she looks up, and you see the doorknob, and it just clicks over, and somehow this doll managed to climb up, get to the doorknob, and open it up, and the door swings in, and he's like on the knob, and he's like, ha, you know, and he fucking jumps off. He's fucking coming after her again, attacking her. She runs in the bathroom now and manages to lock the door this time. And then her fucking bathtub is still filled with water. She didn't drain the bath that she got out of forever. Why was she keeping this water around? So she's like washing some of the blood off of her. And then the doorknob starts to wiggle, and she looks over, and then you see the lock, and then fucking... and the fucking doll knows how to pick a lock. This Zuni warrior who in his time there was no way that a fucking doll, or not a doll, a lock was invented. So how did he know how to pick a fucking lock? But regardless, he picks the lock. So he comes in again and he's like, you know. So she takes a towel and fucking grabs him and then dunks him in the water. And I think she could have killed him here if she would just kept him in the towel and kept drowning him. But she lets go of him and she like runs for the door. And when she turns back, he pops up out of the bathtub and he's doing like the Rambo where he's got like the knife in his mouth. And he's like, you know. So they're running again. And fucking she ends up making him run at her, and she traps him in the suitcase. And then she goes to open up the lock on her door, but she doesn't know how to fucking open it, or I don't know what happened here, but she has to go and get an ice pick from the kitchen, and she's trying to break the lock, but she's the one that put on the lock. Like, I don't know what this was about. She can't get the fucking lock open. She looks over and the dude is like carving through the suitcase to get out. She goes over and she's trying to like grab the knife every time it comes up, but she just ends up getting stabbed in the finger. And then eventually the guy like peeks his head out of the suitcase, and she takes the ice pick and starts like stabbing him in the fucking face, you know? And so he's like, and he falls down. So it's quiet, and she's like, oh, I think I got him. So she opens up the suitcase, and he jumps out again. This time he bites onto her arm, and she's like, oh, shit, and she, like, throws him through a fucking, one of the lamps she had. So she runs into the kitchen, and they're fighting again, and he jumps up, and he's, like, biting her neck. And eventually she manages to get him off and throw him into the oven where she was cooking her dinner that night. And she fucking melts him. And then, after all the screaming and stuff has died down, she opens up the oven door, and she goes, and she falls, and it fades to black, and you don't see, like, I was like, was he still alive? Did he jump out at her? Like, what the fuck just happened? So then when the movie comes back up, Annie, or what is her name? Amelia goes to the fucking phone and calls her mom. It was like, hey, I'm sorry for how I acted. How about you come over to my place and we could have dinner, you know? And then it seems like the mom's like, are you all right? And she's like, yeah, I'm fine. There's nothing wrong with me. And she hangs up and she goes over to the door and she breaks this weird lock that she couldn't get before. And then she crouches down in front of the door with this big knife, like waiting on the ground, and then she starts to smile, and she has the sharp teeth that the Zuni doll had. And so I guess somehow the Zuni doll, the Zuni warrior spirit fucking came into her body, and now it's taken over her. That doesn't explain how it would know how to use a phone, know the mom's number, and even want to kill the mom because it has no connection to her at all. But maybe it like heard the conversation they were having as it was sitting there. I'm not really sure, but that's how it ends. So, so there you go. That's the third and final story of Trilogy of Terror. So, that's there you go. I didn't see a budget for this movie either. But best of, worst of, the best of the movie is that last 5 minutes. Like I was just sort of talking about it. If you go and watch it, literally that last like 5 to 7 minutes or whatever is just screaming and like running around, and there's no like breather. Every time you think there's a breather, the fucking guy starts picking locks and shit. And it was honestly, yeah, it was the best part of the movie, like the last 7 minutes of that. So it changed, because before that story was a stinker. Like the 5 minutes of her talking to the mom and just all it sucked. But that last 7 minutes really fucking turned it around, and it was pretty cool. Also, too, on like the poster, the Zuni doll is like on the poster, and I think they made a second one of these, and he's like on that too. So the Zuni doll is like definitely the famous thing from this movie. I had even seen it before, like I didn't know what movie it was from, but when I was looking for a movie to watch and I saw that, I was like, I know that fucking doll. So that was definitely the big hit of this movie. But anyway, so yeah, my best of is that last 7 minutes. Runner up is the fucking you've poisoned me. No, I've killed you. Dun dun dun. Just fucking, that was great. It made me laugh. It was great for a different reason. Worst of, the whole fucking second story, Millicent and Therese or whatever. It was terrible. It sucked. That's it. That's my worst of. So, yeah. So, there you go. So, anyway, that's the end of Trilogy of Terror. Next week should be Bride of Chucky. It was supposed to be this week, but circumstances, we had to postpone it. I hope anyone, dealing with the hurricane, they make out all right. Hopefully I make out all right. And hopefully we'll be back next week with Bride of Chucky. If things, who knows, we might get fucking just destroyed, and it could be a while for an episode. But if not, Bride of Chucky will be next week. And then we were supposed to watch Cujo after that, but that Rob Zombie Monsters movie just came out, and so maybe we'll watch the Monsters. We still want to watch Barbarian at some point, so that'll be coming soon. But yeah, next week should be Bride of Chucky. So thanks for watching. Link to the gaming channel and everything in the description. And yeah, so hopefully I see you next week. If not, go watch the other movies we talked about, because you're not getting any more. All right, see you guys later.